to our second event of the Science in the Arctic series, celebrating the 75th year anniversary of diplomatic ties between Canada and Iceland. Organized by the Embassy of Canada in Reykjavik, Embassy of Iceland in Ottawa, in partnership with Polar Knowledge Canada and the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network. The first event in the series took place in November 2021 and discussed Canada-Iceland Arctic research cooperation, and we will share the link to the recording from the event in the chat box. Today's topic is gender equality in the Arctic, and the base of our discussion is the Phase 3 Pan-Arctic report on gender equality in the Arctic, which Embla Oddsdóttir, director at the Icelandic Arctic Network, will present, followed by a panel discussion and Q&A moderated by Ambassador Jeanette Mencius. The next event in this series will take place on in March on traditional indigenous local knowledge. In September, we will discuss climate change, and the last event in the Science in the Arctic series will take place in November on innovation and food security in the Arctic. We are as well organizing a lecture series on Canada-Iceland relations. And the first event is on February 24th on oceans, the blue economy and innovation. Now to the task at hand. I would like to welcome Þórdís Kolbrún Reykfjörð Gylfadóttir, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Development Cooperation in Iceland, to give us her opening remarks. The Minister had to be in Parliament today for discussion and is unable to join us in person, but took time this morning to record her opening message. We will share the Minister's resume as well in the chat box. Following the Minister's remarks, we hand the Kindle over to Embla Oddsdóttir to give us a short overview of the Gender Equality in the Arctic report, published mid-year 2021. Minister, thank you again for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador. First, let me thank Canada and our partners, Polar Knowledge Canada and the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network, for the good collaboration that we have. I am happy to have the opportunity to address you today on the important topic of gender equality in the Arctic region. Gender equality is fundamental for advancing sustainable development and therefore crucial for improving societal well-being and stability in the Arctic. Of course, it is also a fundamental human right and a true hallmark of what a good and desirable society looks like. Gender equality and women's empowerment are cornerstones of Iceland's foreign policy and a priority reflected within our many strands of work. The Arctic is definitely no exception. It is important to consider gender perspectives in this context to reflect the different experiences and concerns of all gender identities as an integral element of all our policies and programs. This is a way to increase the likelihood that everyone benefits and inequality is not perpetuated. Iceland has led the Gender Equality in the Arctic project from its inception in 2013 under the auspices of the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Group. The first phase of the project produced the Gender Equality in the Arctic, Current Realities, Future Challenges Conference in 2014 and a subsequent report published in 2015. The second phase was focused on the development of a circumpolar network of experts and an online platform. And last spring, we were proud to present the result of the third phase of the project, the ambitious report that will set the tone for today's discussions. One of the many important aspects of this report is its emphasis on strengthening gender statistics in the context of many challenges facing the Arctic region. Indeed, meaningful research and quality data is fundamental to deepen the understanding of gender issues in the Arctic, and at the same time, it can provide crucial insight for decision makers to develop well-informed policies. We need to make sure that we know where we are if we are to know whether we are making progress. Perhaps the most inspiring element of the gender equality in the Arctic project is the broad engagement process it has led to. This includes collaboration between multiple stakeholders from across the Arctic and contributors such as academics, researchers, youth, indigenous representatives, and other experts. Let me conclude by thanking you all for your commitments to this agenda and for all that you have done to help drive gender equality in our region. I wish you a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
And now over to you, Embla.
Thank you, Hlynur, and thank you to our minister for an excellent contribution. We continue to be very grateful for the support of the Ministry for Foreign Affairs here in Iceland. I'm also very pleased to be a part of this event here today to introduce the report, the Pan-Arctic Report on Gender Equality in the Arctic. I want to share my screen as I have some slides. And I'm hoping that you can see my screen, a colorful image of a yellow and green flower.
We can.
Okay, thank you. Well, the report was an Arctic Council Icelandic Chairmanship project under the theme of people and communities in the Arctic and under the Sustainable Development Working Group. And lead and co-leads included Iceland, Sweden, Finland, Canada, the United States, the Sami Council, and the Aleut International Association. But as it is a highly collaborative project, it includes many other additional partners, of which you will see a list on this slide. The GEA project is led by the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network. And while the report is published by the chairmanship and the SDWG with the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network, the Icelandic Directorate for Equality, and the Stefánsson Arctic Institute, it is done so in great collaboration with all our partners and sponsors. A vital component of the work has been a collaborative and dynamic engagement process. We made significant efforts to ensure inclusion and transparency during the process by actively soliciting feedback from peers and interested parties. The project partners, the editorial committee, the SDWG's Social, Economic and Cultural Expert Group, and the Youth Advisory Group were instrumental in providing ideas, knowledge, and support in developing themes for the report. Further, the inclusion of permanent participants and other indigenous experts was a vital component of the engagement process, and through our discussions and with their guidance, we inched closer to better understanding indigenous perspectives on gender and related issues. We had 10 lead authors of the thematic chapters and were blessed with a team of seriously committed authors who reached out to and coordinated the work of approximately 80 contributing authors from 15 countries, including all Arctic states. Significant contributions were also made by indigenous experts through being project partners, on the editorial committee, on the Youth Advisory Board, and through direct contributions to chapters. This included the Sami Council, the Aleut International Association, and the Arctic Athabaskan Council, as well as the Paktutit Inuit Women of Canada. We held 6 online, public, and thematic feedback sessions and integrated this feedback into the chapters, in addition to reviews by partners, the EDCOM, the Youth Advisory Group, the SDWG, and external reviewers. There was considerable time pressure on the project, and we were ambitious and wanted to deliver a useful document on time. But during the process, we learned many lessons. I want to highlight only 3 of those. Indigenous and youth perspectives are to some extent reflected in the chapters, but we do recognize that we will have to do even better in future phases of the project. if we are to meaningfully include Indigenous perspectives and move even further away from token engagement. In the report, we suggest that Indigenous and youth perspectives be an integral part from conception to final product, and that resource and funding requirements be built into project proposals and funding applications. A truly meaningful consultation and engagement process requires time and extensive dialogue. It is crucial to make sure there is sufficient time allotted to this, similarly to interdisciplinary projects. Drawing from diverse knowledge systems and weaving together multiple perspectives requires a level of respect and commitment that should not be underestimated or rushed. Based on feedback received, the chapter themes we decided to prioritize were law and governance, which examines formal obligations regarding gender equality in Arctic public governance as expressed in political and legal government documents, including special consideration of Indigenous peoples. Number 2 was security, which examines the impacts of inequalities in the Arctic through a security lens and identifies trends in insecurity. The chapter draws from global insights about insecurity that are relevant to the Arctic and identifies challenges and insecurities. We have gender and environment, which provides an overview of the gender dimensions of issues connected to the broadly understood environment of the Arctic region. We have migration and mobility, which discusses how migration and mobility in the Arctic are constructed through gender and why an understanding of migration and mobility requires a gendered approach. We have indigeneity, gender, violence and reconciliation, which seeks to take a step towards mapping the complex relations amongst violence, gender, the social, economic, political and legal systems, human health and well-being, culture and identities in the Arctic. And finally, we have the Empowerment and Fate Control chapter, which seeks to identify concrete strategies for political, economic, and civic gender empowerment to facilitate sustainable policymaking for the Arctic. We are extremely grateful for all the support received from various funding sources. These include support for chapters from the MFAs of Sweden, Norway, and Finland, the government of the Faroe Islands, the Ministry of the Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, and the National Science Foundation and US State Department. Additionally, support was provided by the Nordic Council of Ministers, the MFA Iceland, the Icelandic Gender Equality Fund, the Prime Minister's Office in Iceland, the Directorate of Equality, and the Stefánsson Arctic Institute. Without this support, we would never have been able to pull this together. We see this commitment to the project as reflecting a greater understanding of the importance of gender in the Arctic region and its sustainable development. The report provides almost 70 policy relevant highlights, which can be found with each chapter and in the executive summary. Most prominent were the need for mainstreaming and gender-based analysis, better gender and sex disaggregated data, inclusive terminology and intersectionality. The highlights are relevant for multiple audiences, including Arctic states, the Arctic Council and its working groups, policymakers, private industry, the research community, and the public. This slide indicates the categories under which policy highlights were included. As you will see from the report, there is still considerable work ahead in reducing inequalities, not only in terms of gender, but in a broader understanding of systemic and persistent inequalities, for instance, in terms of Indigenous and non-Indigenous populations. 3 recommendations are provided specifically for the Arctic Council. The first of these is related to gender mainstreaming, where it is recommended the Arctic Council systematically engages with and mainstreams gender-based analysis across its work, setting an example at national and regional levels. The second relates to the data challenges we encountered in all chapters. Here we recommend the Council encourage and facilitate the development of guidelines for consistent and comparable data throughout the Arctic. The final recommendation relates to the need to further analyze, refine, prioritize, and operationalize policy relevant highlights. It really is suggesting that phase 4 of the GEO project includes support for implementation of these recommendations. The report was welcomed at the ministerial meeting, at the Arctic Council ministerial meeting in May of 2021, and included in the Reykjavik Declaration, where the Council committed to emphasize the importance of gender equality and respect for diversity for sustainable development in the Arctic, and welcomes the report and encourages the mainstreaming of gender-based analysis in the work of the Arctic Council, calling for further action to advance gender equality in the Arctic. Further, the Arctic Council Strategic Plan 2021 to 2030 referred also to the topic of gender, to promote gender equality and non-discrimination in the Arctic, with the aim of contributing to sustainability and balanced participation in leadership and decision-making both in the public and private sectors. The work continues. We have sent a physical copy of the report widely, and we will continue to disseminate topics and findings from the report, including through participation in various events. There are several spin-offs in development, including extended chapters, a book on empowerment, articles, projects, and potentially a translation of the report into Russian. And then, of course, preparations for phase 4 are ongoing. A lot of ideas have been circulating, and we really could go into a million different directions. However, we will have to prioritize, as well as finding an approach everyone can live with. And I, for one, am looking forward to the road ahead. I want to conclude by thanking all of those involved, partners, EDCOM, Youth Advisory Group, and of course our various sponsors and co-sponsors for all the support and advice along this journey. I also want to thank our lead authors and contributing authors, our designer and the photographers, and Nordregio for their maps and data, the SECEC and the SDWG for showing us the way through Arctic Council processes, and also the International Arctic Social Science Association for ongoing collaboration and support. I also want to give thanks to the research assistants in the GEO team for plowing through endless days and weekends with persistence, patience, and positivity. And to our Indigenous colleagues, thank you for the support, your contributions to this report and the process, and for guidance provided. And last but not least, I would like to thank the Icelandic chairmanship team and our Minister for Foreign Affairs for continued support of and believe in the project on gender equality. Without all these great folks, we would have been entirely lost. I could go on and on about the report all day. It is 250 pages, approximately, but we do not have the time, not today. The project webpage includes a specific page for the report where you can find all relevant information, including information on all those involved in the making of it. The report and the executive summary is available for download, and we encourage you to have a look-see and give us your feedback. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Embla. That was a fabulous overview of what I know was a very in-depth and significant report that took a lot of time and people and partners to produce. So thank you for providing us that background and context. My name is Jeanette Menzies, and I'm Canada's ambassador to Iceland. I'm very proud to be here today with the first visual display of our 75th anniversary logo, which we will be profiling at events throughout the year. I wanted to note in Embla's, on the last page of her presentation, the long list of partners and sponsors and how diverse that list is. And I also wanted to point to the fact that I took a quick look at our list of participants today, And I would say our list of participants is equally long and diverse. And so thank you to everyone for taking the time today to join us for this discussion. We have a great lineup of speakers. So what I'll do is I will introduce our first speaker and lay the groundwork for perhaps a few questions, but I'd like our speakers to really comment on the report and their own experience working on these issues to share with the group today. And we will have time for discussion at the end, so you can use the chat button as you come up with some ideas. You're welcome to share them while we're listening, but I won't set the tone for the discussion until after all four of our speakers have spoken. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Bridget Larocque, who I've had the great fortune to have worked with throughout various Arctic Council years. But Bridget is an Indigenous resident of the Northwest Territories. She has vast experience on the Arctic Council and Arctic governance issues. She brings a distinct worldview from the Arctic with specific expertise on Indigenous and gender issues. She serves as a policy advisor and researcher with the Arctic Athabascan Council and was executive director of Gudjonsson Council International. Over to you, Bridget.
Good morning, Jeanette, and thanks for the invite. Embla, what a great overview as always, and it's always a pleasure working with both of you. So just to give some background on my contribution to GF3 or gender equality in the Arctic. On behalf of the Arctic Athabascan Council, I participate on the editorial committee, was a contributing author and an external reviewer of chapters. So some of the important takeaways from my perspective, including the ones that Embla identified, was the co-production of knowledge. And that for me has to be on equal footing. Indigenous knowledges and worldviews are just as important, if not more, when working from and in an Arctic context. And that means we need to know one another and where our information or knowledges stem from. We had a diverse group of experts, knowledge holders, and mentees, and at times we didn't have the opportunity to delve deep into the worldviews or unpack research findings and come up with questions pertaining to the research or concerns we might have had with the research that we came upon. And data has to be made available and be comprehensive, and of course managed and owned by Indigenous peoples organizations in order to respect space, ownership, and autonomy. The report covered 6 main themes, as Embla identified, and these are more than, but there are more, but they built off previous work and a work that's in progress as well. From a personal observation and perspective is the need for inclusion of all genders and cisgender non-binary to capture their lived experiences in the Arctic and respect that all lives do matter. If we are to promote equity and equality, we need to know how these 2 terms are incorporated and used or not. Without fully appreciating and understanding worldviews and lived experiences as they relate to truth and fact, then we're not creating policy or conducting research that allows us to co-create systemic changes. However, as I indicated, it's a work in progress. We hope to do more in phase 4 as we heal and weave through systems that are now allowing for reconciliation and recreation, or recognition, sorry. So, you know, that allows for not only the spiritual growth, but the mythology of Indigenous peoples and their worldviews. So thank you for the invite. It was a process of learning and healing and growth, and we continue to do this in future work. So thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. I'd now like to introduce Hjalti Omar Augustsson, who's the project manager for the Gender Equality in the Arctic project and a special advisor at the Directorate for Equality in Iceland. He has a degree in law and a diploma in polar law from the University of Akureyri. And he's been working on human rights issues since 2014 through teaching and project management, as well as membership on boards. Over to you, Hjalti.
Thank you, Jeanette. Yeah, like Janet says, my name is Hjalti Ágústsson. I was a member of, or part of the Gender Equality in Arctic project phase 3 from its beginning. Me and Embla kind of created the project outline together, and I will be repeating some of the things that have been said here before, because we very quickly realized that for projects such as these to be meaningful, it needed a lot of collaborative work and consultation and contributions and conversations with very varied group of people, not the least indigenous representatives and youth. So we quickly established a youth advisory group, a member of which is here with us today, and tried to have a broad collaborative conversation with indigenous representatives. And one of the lessons that we learned, for example, and me especially maybe as a white middle-aged lawyer from Iceland, was how little I really know and how important the conversations we had with our indigenous representatives, not least Bridget Norma Shorty from the Arctic Athabascan Council and Carla Jessen Williamson, who was one of our lead authors on the report. Those conversations were very enlightening for me and taught me a lot. And like Embla said, the lessons we learned were that we need this collaboration and these conversations to take place all throughout projects from when we create them, so that the points of view are present all the time, so we don't overlook important aspects of what we should be looking at when we are creating the projects. And I hope for phase 4, which we are now entering into and planning, we have that collaboration, and we have a broad network of people that we can look to and collaborate with. The main things that we learned from the report itself have been touched upon as well. One of the things that we need to mainstream gender equality into all aspects of governance within the Arctic. And that means mainstreaming gender equality in decision-making and gender budgeting, for example. And we need to consider the effects of decisions on the different groups of people within the Arctic. Not only based on gender, but based on a variety of factors, ethnicity, where people originate from, gender, etc. And for that to be possible, we need information. We need data to be able to assess the effects of decisions. And what we have found is a severe lack of data that is useful for such comparisons. And we need data on local and national levels that account for gender, ethnicity, origin, and the Arctic. We need Arctic specific data as well. We need those on a national level, and preferably data should be comparable between states as well. That's a much more complicated issue that we are trying to look into, and hopefully in phase 4 to kind of map what needs to be done to be able to gather comparable data. I mean, definitions for crimes, for example, are different between states. So even if you have data on certain crimes, let's say rape, for example, how rape is defined varies between states. So even that kind of data is difficult to compare. So these are the most important lessons that we have learned. And we hope we can move these issues forward in phase 4, where we want to have workshops on mainstreaming gender in the Arctic and what we can do to address the scarcity of data that we so desperately need to be able to compare. I think that's it for me for now. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Hjalti. I appreciated those comments, especially the details on the challenges around data. Next up is my colleague Sarah Cox, who is the Director of Circumpolar Affairs at Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, where she's worked for a good chunk of her 21 career with the Government of Canada. She's also the head of the Canadian delegation to the Sustainable Development Working Group. And interestingly, she is currently the public servant in residence at Concordia University in Montreal. And I look forward to participating in one of her courses later on this year. Welcome, Sarah.
Great, thanks, Jeanette. I'm still getting used to that public servant in residence business. It's quite new for me, but very happy to be here. I think for the purpose of this brief presentation, my role as head of DEL at SDWG for Canada is more relevant. And I think it's totally appropriate, of course, that out of the 6 working groups at the Arctic Council, this work, GEA, takes place at the SDWG, given that our sort of mandate is to really look at issues around the human dimension of the Arctic. So it sits very well with our working group. As Embla mentioned, it's entering its 4th iteration within the Arctic Council's SDWG, Sustainable Development Working Group. And Canada and Iceland have enjoyed about 10 years of a long-standing series of cooperations. And I am absolutely thrilled, again, to be working with Iceland. I think despite generally a smallish team, they managed to do an incredible amount of work and stay very focused, which is not easy in the SDWG. But with respect to the delivery of GEA3, Canada partnered with Dr. Carla Jessen-Williamson from University of Saskatchewan to do a chapter focused on indigeneity, gender, violence, and reconciliation. This really looked at gender-based violence, systemic inequalities, and something we've all discussed and has been mentioned here, and that's the lack of gendered data, as Hjalti said. And also inclusive terminology and gender mainstreaming broadly, which of course is, I think, quite challenging and really interesting to have a good look at. The Government of Canada also partnered with Paktutit Inuit Women of Canada on a contribution across chapters that really focused on Inuit women's approaches on improving gender balance in policy and decision-making processes. And then we also partnered with the Government of the Northwest Territories for a chapter on empowerment, including a profile of their campaign school for young women. So in terms of my own observations, I think part of the challenge with gender equality, I mean, actually with many projects in the SDWG, but particularly I would say GEA, is that it's very challenging because it's so vast. And Embla mentioned this. I think at every iteration of the project, there are a multitude of possibilities in terms of what we can focus on, and we can't focus on everything. So trying to whittle that down to something manageable and meaningful is quite an exercise in itself. I think that through our engagement, my own and my team, with GEA and the Icelandic team, we have seen really incredible leadership, and particularly from the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network. And I think critical to that, to their success as well, is this approach to building each iteration of the project and to the development of the GEA3 report while using real innovation, inclusiveness, and this sort of constantly evolving based on feedback. And I would say one of the big lessons learned on this project was using that feedback, like really genuinely using that feedback loop from very diverse perspectives and voices at every stage of the development, and including, and I would say critically, and maybe Alyssa will speak to that, but the role of the Arctic youth, or the role of Arctic youth through the advisory committee, because we talk about that a lot at the STWG and at the Arctic Council writ large, but it's not totally easy to figure out how to meaningfully incorporate the voice of youth, and really from the inception of a project. Otherwise, it doesn't have as much impact. So I think it's really clear that being inclusive from the outset has made the project and the report much richer in content, and I would say credibility. And I think it stands as a really effective model in terms of project development and communications at the STWG. My team and I have been very glad to be part of it. I would like to take 2 minutes, because I'm a committed public servant, just to give a quick plug to the Government of Canada in terms of what we're doing for gender equality. So, I mean, I like to think like Iceland, but I mean, Iceland is an incredible model of gender equality. But certainly a priority for Canada is to advance gender equality for the benefit of all of its citizens. It's not just for women or other folks, it's all citizens. And one of the main ways the Government of Canada is working on gender equality is through our commitment to integrating Gender-Based Analysis Plus, or GBA Plus, as a key tool to inform priorities and our policies and programs. So GBA Plus uses an intersectional lens to address systemic inequalities, including, for example, systemic racism, unconscious bias, gender-based discrimination, barriers for persons with disabilities, discrimination against LGBTQ2 communities, and several others. And our Prime Minister has explicitly tasked ministers to integrate GBA Plus in all the decisions that they make. And GBA Plus training and tools are available in all Canadian departments and agencies, are actually a requirement for cabinet submissions. So among some of the folks that have contributed to that work, Paktuti has highlighted a number of issues relevant to gender equality that we're working to address in the Government of Canada. One of them, for example, is related to maternal and reproductive health for Inuit women, most of whom have had to, or in many cases have to, fly south in order to give birth. So through GBA Plus, Canada is trying to ensure that progress is made to advance gender equality that addresses the needs of Northern residents. I really look forward to participating as a partner in GEA4. Embla mentioned it again. I think that, I mean, many suggestions came in terms of what we could focus on. So it'll be very interesting to try and, I mean, it's already been done to some extent, but really sort of hone in on what we want to focus on. And just huge kudos again to the Icelandic team. I think you guys have done such a great job, and it's a total pleasure as usual to work with Embla and her team and all the partners. And thanks for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for joining us today. Our next speaker as part of this panel discussion on the report is Juno Bertilsson. Juno is the Greenlandic representative of the Arctic Youth Network and a board member of the Youth Advisory Board of the Gender Equality in the Arctic Project. He earned his master's in cross-cultural studies at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark, which included an exchange at the University of Victoria, Canada, where he focused on Indigenous studies. He's also involved in a number of projects, working groups, and organizations that mainly revolve around Arctic and Indigenous issues. Over to you, Juno. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. First of all, I would like to emphasize that I am no longer a member of these boards that you mentioned, but I'm here in respect of my former membership at the Arctic Youth Network, and by extension of that, I was a member of the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Group, more precisely the Gender Equality in the Arctic Youth Advisory Board, and I participated in the advisory board to be a part of the work on the project or the report that the Gender Equality in the Arctic Phase 3 was working on. So first of all, actually, I would like to thank the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Group. I would like to thank Embla for inviting me here today, who is the director of the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network. And also thank you to the many contributors to the report. And of course, also thank you to the Youth Advisory Board and the Arctic Youth Network. Next, I will emphasize, since I work as currently the personal secretary to the Minister of Business and Trade in the government of Greenland, I'm speaking on my own behalf in the context of the reasons I just mentioned, and I do not speak on behalf of the Greenlandic government. I just want to emphasize that. So I work with the chapter in the report, the chapter titled Indigeneity, Gender, Violence, and Reconciliation. And one thing that I wanted to stay very attentive to in that work was to emphasize the effects of colonialism, not only in a historical sense, but also how colonialism today affects indigenous societies. I think it's very important to always be attentive and cognizant of these effects of colonialism. In this context, in the report, working on this chapter where I reviewed this chapter written by Carla Williamson, for me, it's very important to always be attentive towards these things because people have a tendency to forget. History is quite often forgotten. And especially in Greenland and in indigenous communities, it's important to be aware of why the situation in indigenous societies today, why we are in the state that we are in today with a lot of the social issues and the problems that we face in our everyday lives. So working on this this report and in the Youth Advisory Board, it was very valuable for me personally to just be engaged in that work, but also to share my views on how you always need to be attentive towards the effects of colonialism. And I say that because it's the most prolonged urgent matter in the Arctic among indigenous populations. The violence that permeates our societies needs to be addressed, and this is a long-term kind of it's everyday work for people in indigenous societies. And it's important to say that there are no simple and quick solutions. It's hard work day in and day out for all members of indigenous communities who, I don't know a lot of indigenous people or local people here who are not in some way affected by violence that is a result of colonial violence. And I think it's very important to say that working on reports like these and putting policies into place is one aspect that is very important, but it's also very important to kind of put emphasis on the very hard work that people do in their everyday lives. People who are not sitting in boards or in leadership positions, people who are just living their everyday lives are affected by the violence that permeates indigenous societies because of colonial history. And I think it's very important to stay attentive to that. So one thing I really was, one thing I took away from the report and a very positive aspect was the recommendation that it had on gender mainstreaming. And that means it's systematic inclusion of gender and an application of an intersectional approach across the council's work. I also thought it was very important that the report mentioned the data challenges, which were also mentioned here earlier, that it's important to do something about the insufficient data on gender data and intersectional data. In that respect, I think it's important to also mention that in Greenland, there's also statistical, there's a need for statistics on the grounds of ethnicity, because this is a very important aspect. Gendered violence do not affect ethnicities in Greenland or any indigenous community the same way for different ethnic groups. So it's very important to highlight that the data that is missing needs to be attentive towards the differences that there are on ethnic groups in indigenous communities. And with that, I would like to conclude my presentation.
Thank you, Juno, for your very your thoughtful reflections on some of the impacts in Indigenous communities. I really appreciate your perspectives on the matter. And thank you for correcting what your current role is and that you're not representing the government of Greenland. I would like to ask Alyssa Carpenter to join us. She will be our final speaker before we have a small breakout session. Actually, I think we'll take about 5 minutes of questions first, Alyssa, if that's okay with you. I'm going to take maybe 5 minutes to engage a bit of a conversation on the panel. If I can have all my panelists bring their video back on. Just to start us off, I would like to ask the audience, if you can go to your chat function. I'm curious, of the 89 of us that are on this call today, I'm curious where people are located. You don't have to tell us, but if you're able to get on your chat and share with us where you're sitting right now, that would be helpful to get a bit of a sense as to how far our reach is today. Well, Mexico, okay. Quebec, Norway, Reykjavik, US, Denmark, Germany, Kingston, Finland, Ecuador. Well, this is certainly a diverse group we have here today. It's great to see where everyone's dialing in from. Yeah, so we've got a lot of people from of course, Canada and Iceland. We seem to have a lot of people from other Arctic states. And then we have a whole group of you who are in other countries around the world, which is fabulous. I really appreciate such a diverse set of people on our call today. My next question is to the group, to the audience, and this might help our panelists and also those who might be involved in phase 4 and our future webinar series as well. But can you tell me, how did you hear about this event? And I know we shared it on probably Twitter, on LinkedIn. Some of us sent emails to colleagues. Maybe you heard about it on the street, at a coffee shop, not sure. Anyway, if you want to share where you heard about it, that's also helpful for us. Oh, this is also helpful to see which of our partners are sharing. That's great. See, Canor shared it with staff. That's great. Mailing lists, Twitter. Okay, this is helpful. Now, one question, I'm not going to ask everyone how old they are, because I don't think we're allowed to ask that question. But I have this sense that we probably don't have a lot of youth on this call, but I would love to maybe, I don't know how to ask this question, but if any of you can maybe write the word youth if you consider yourself to be youth, and I'd say that's maybe under the age of 35. And I just want to see if we have any, again, this is voluntary, but just to see how many of you are youth on the call. Well, that's pretty good, actually. Can always do better, but this is positive. There's a good number of youth. Great. All right, so now since you're on the chat function, please feel free to pose a question to any of the panelists if you have any specific questions. And then in the meantime, I might just take a moment to ask the panelists one question that I have. Young at heart does count. Yes, you can say you're youth. Okay, so my first question to the group here is regarding phase 4 that you've talked about. It seems to be a common theme amongst the panelists that the approach should be shifted somewhat to ensure Indigenous and youth participation in phase 4. So one of my questions is, what will be done differently in the context of phase 4 to ensure sufficient youth, to ensure youth and Indigenous engagement as part of the process from conception through to the final product. And feel free to just jump in to respond to that. I don't, maybe Embla, maybe that question's for you and one other.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Well, see, the phase 4 will consist of 2 components, and a discussion on the development of phase 4 started with a meeting in April or May in 2021, where all the partners and the youth advisory group and everyone involved was invited to come and speak their mind as to how they thought we should emphasize in GEO4. So the 2 components in GEO4 will be, on one hand, mainstreaming, which is on one hand, internal, looking at processes and procedures within the Arctic Council. And we will make sure that both Indigenous and youth representatives are invited to take part in both workshops and also in preparing a recommended next steps for the Arctic Council document. The second component has more to do with looking closer at certain themes and topics that have been identified by various experts, including and mostly, in fact, Indigenous experts. This is something that we are looking to develop further with Indigenous and youth representatives. And in fact, we're trying to find a way so that this can be Indigenous-led. This can be a completely Indigenous-led component with our support. So wherever we can invite people to the table to be a part of the conversation, whether it's in workshops or in documents or in events or interviews, we will do whatever we can to include both Indigenous and youth experts, if that answers your questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Embla. Any other comments from the other panelists?
I'll just, yeah, Jeanette, I think I'll add a bit in support of Embla's contribution that, you know, where we have Indigenous people's organizations, the prime participant organizations, and we're making more effort to ensure that our young leaders, the youth advisors, are engaged in the process. We struggle with time constraints. They're at university, they're working at various, with various governments, be it Indigenous to the territorial federal. However, you know, that's not to say that their voices won't be heard or included. So, and then AAC also has its own gender commitment, work commitment. So through that, we will try to engage as many of our young leaders as possible in the process.
Great, thank you, Bridget. And I will note that there's a few comments coming in with suggestions, etc., on engaging, involving youth in the process. I want to make sure that we have enough time for Alyssa to speak. We've asked Alyssa to join us. Alyssa is the director of Paktutit, the National Representative Organization of Inuit Women in Canada. We've asked her to share her perspectives and thoughts on how to raise awareness. And I'll give her the floor here. And if at the end, if someone has a burning question, you can put it in the chat. And if we have time, we'll touch upon it. But otherwise, we will take it to ponder as the team moves into phase 4. So I'll turn over to you, Alyssa.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Alyssa Carpenter. I must note I have 5 minutes. But for those who don't know me, I'm Inuit Dene. I'm participating in Whitehorse, Yukon on traditional territory of Kwalindun and Gudjonsson. I'm the I want to say I'm a board director. Director makes me seem like the ED of Paktutit. I'm not. I'm one of the youth reps, and I've been there for a number of years. And I was asked through my role with Paktutit to be here. With the work that we've done with Paktutit specifically is there's this undergoing validation of their GBA work. So Paktutit has been noted here already. But that framework kind of a process will be all assessed and reviewed at our upcoming AGM and board meeting. So a lot of work this last few years, especially in my time being at the board, it's been really looked at and prioritized throughout our organization at a board level and trickling into at the advocacy that our president, Rebecca, does on our behalf in all the spaces that she is nationally and of course internationally. But it's pretty common, where to know that the worldview from someone who is Inuit, and I would also echo this in many other Indigenous communities, not just within Canada, but when we see gender, a GBA lens on a range of issues, we see it as a collective viewpoint. We see it as a community. We see it as family units. Tend to be when social issues, as many that are echoed today, it just doesn't individually impact us, it does as a community level, as a collective. And it is something that I think needs to really be explored a little bit more intently on how we do work like this. I've heard a lot around it's to do meaningful, to better engage, to integrate so many of these key complicated pieces, especially on social issues. And just complimenting Juno for really bringing in that harder conversation of the effects of colonization is still really felt at a community level and seen and witnessed at a systematic level in so many ways that we see work like this being done when we see policy, when we see leadership, when we see advocacy, and we see a lot of movements happening as well. And that's where I'm going to kind of end with that. I'm currently working with an Indigenous-led effort called the Western Arctic Youth Collective. The reason why we created this is because we were seeing this significant gap of engaging Indigenous young people respectfully and meaningfully. We're still seeing this constant trend. We've only been around for a short period of time, and it's been overwhelming, the requests for us to partake and be in so many spaces, represent others. We're only a small collective, but we're being asked to speak for others on other sides of the country or in other parts of the world. I really want to specify, I really think that should be explored a lot more, even to this extent. I was asked to do this on Sunday. So really respecting my time and how important it is to involve Indigenous young people, and especially those of us who are connected and living within Arctic regions. So that is some of the pieces, because many of us are doing a lot of great work. We get asked to do things very last minute. There is a question around sustainable funding to support a lot of these initiatives. I'm seeing some of the comments here, and I wholeheartedly agree with many of these youth that are already saying, compensate us, value our time, value our knowledge, value our contributions, respect our time. Yes, many of us may be in university or managing jobs, and of course, just trying to keep things afloat among pandemic realities. Many of us are young parents. These are realities that many of us are doing, but also many of us are also breaking cycles and really stepping up for the harder conversations that we're seeing at a community level. So intergenerational trauma, suicide, overdose rates. These are realities that I'm very grateful that our young and capable team is taking on harder conversations that we see at a community level, because it trickles at the more higher levels here. But I'm really grateful for what I've learned within the work that I've done with Paktutit. They've mentored me in so many amazing ways. Those women have been there for years, over 30 years, some of them, going back and into that space. So how much women, and of course, really amplifying gender diverse folks that are starting to find safe spaces to be their authentic selves and participate and be invited to these conversations, because that is something that is also still missing at these levels of engagement, and just really the building capacity piece. That's something I hear constantly. There's many groups that I feel like, or initiatives that really try to do that, but they lack that representation, that context, that understanding of the complex issues we see in communities. So really embracing and building really valuable relationships and meaningful relationships with groups, individuals who are doing that work. And all it takes sometimes is just reaching out and getting to know them and the work that they're doing and understanding that. So I believe I went over 5 minutes, but I am grateful to be here and just to have this moment to share. Youth work is really valuable. Many young people have so many incredible ideas. I believe, like, I'm 32, I'm learning so much from those peers below me, as much as I learn from elders and leaders above me. So we need to really think of that in so many spaces that can reflect intergenerational voices, and be inclusive and meet them where they're at. So making space for that is really important, and being creative, being very creative too, with these heavier conversations as well. So Masi Cho, thank you so much, Hlynur.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for your very powerful words. I have a list of points I was going to say, but I can't end it better than you did. So I just want to thank you for your honesty and being direct about what needs to happen and how to engage youth and compensate and be respectful. Both Canada and Iceland are very focused on giving voices to youth, and we're making a real effort to include youth in all of our webinars. Of course, the Arctic, gender equality, these are all themes that are priorities and common shared elements between our two countries, which we hope to advance during the coming year. Thank you to our speakers today, and thank you to everyone for joining us. We will continue to publicize upcoming webinars. We're always open to ideas of content and speakers, so please feel free to reach out to either of the two embassies or to Polar Knowledge Canada or Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network, our two partners. Thanks again, everyone, for your time today, and enjoy the rest of your day wherever you're spending it, which appears to be a number of different places. Thanks.